So it's over. Attack on Titan just published the last chapter. This is going to be a first impressions for me, as I just read the chapter and I reread it a couple times, but the feels are still fresh. I will do a more in-depth review/analysis in a later video on either this chapter or the final arc, but be forewarned, I'm going to cover some massive spoilers in this video for the ending of this story, especially for the anime only folks. After I quickly cover the events that happened in this chapter, I'll give my first initial impressions and some preliminary analysis. So the chapter kicks off with Eren and Armin having a sort of flashback conversation. This takes place prior to the events of the final battle, and there's sort of a mid-conversation, and Eren's apologizing to Armin for sort of being a dick and beating him up. And basically, long story short, all the events that he did specifically in the last arc was all to bring them to the point where he would become the villain of the world, and his buddies or his comrades and friends would look like heroes after they got done slaying him. But Armin then questions him and wonders how they're going to protect Paradise after this is all over. But Eren says that that's really not going to be a problem, because 80% of humanity is going to be destroyed after this rumbling happens. Also, I want to quickly point out that these guys are kids right now, which is kind of cool, and later on you'll see that it changes. Then Eren explains a little bit about Ymir, and notice they look like they're a little bit older now. And then the next couple of panels are basically an explanation on why the inheritor of the founding Titan was never able to actually do anything substantial. It is because supposedly Ymir, even though she was abused in so many ways, she lost her hometown, her parents got killed by King Fritz, and she also got her tongue pulled out. She still supposedly loved this guy, and that was what bound her power and bound her capabilities and will for so many years. But this all changed supposedly because of Mikasa, and somehow watching Mikasa's actions allowed her to release herself from the limitations or the constrictions of her feelings for King Fritz. When Armin asks Eren about why it was Mikasa, and I'm sure readers were probably wondering too, Eren just admits that he doesn't know. So this not really giving an explanation. More on that later, but basically we don't know why Mikasa was chosen or why she was that person. Notice now they look like they're teenagers, which I thought was cool. They've progressively gotten older as the pages go on. Eren then says that all these events that he sort of made happen, where he killed all these people, he had Armin and the others kill their fellow Paradisians, if that's a word, Paradisians, and this was all due to the memories that he experienced at the medal ceremony. He also admits that the founder's power has sort of messed up his head as far as time goes, so he's not sure what's like the past and the future, and somehow took away his agency for all these events. Then in the next page, it didn't really make sense to me at first, but he basically saves Bertold by, I didn't really get this at the first time I read it. I didn't understand what the hell's going on, but then after rereading it, it basically is that he led the Titan of his father's first wife to eat his mother instead of eating Bertold, because it wasn't his time to die yet, and he somehow knew this because of the founder's powers. Armin then takes his hand and tries to comfort him, and notice they're still looking a little bit older now. Armin then asks Eren about how he feels about Mikasa, and Eren tries to play it cool, but then Armin hits him and forces him to basically express his feelings. And Eren kind of breaks down and admits that he doesn't want Mikasa to find anybody else, and he wants to be the only person in her heart even after he dies. He admits he doesn't want to die himself, and Armin tells him not to give up and maybe there's another way, but then he kind of just writes that off, saying that it's inevitable for him to have died and it had to go down this way. We get this cool spread of the world getting flattened, and we see sort of the aftermath of the rumbling, and Armin asks him why he did the rumbling, and it was just strange that Eren didn't really give an explanation. He just says he doesn't know, but he felt like he had to, and we get this sort of flashback of his father talking to him and telling him that he's free. Then Eren tells Armin that it's time. He's going to erase all his memories, and this is prior to the battle, and he tells him that, you know, they're going to try to kill each other afterwards. Armin then in tears sort of accepts the fact that Eren had to become this person, but he understands why he did it and he forgives him. This panel was touching. They embrace each other, knowing that Armin will probably never see Eren again, and Eren tells Armin that he's humanity's hope. We then flash to when Armin was on the boat with Annie and they were talking, and there's this seagull there. Remember that seagull, because it's kind of key later on. And then we flash to after the battle itself, and Armin suddenly remembers everything. He remembers the conversation he had with Eren before the battle. We see Mikasa holding Eren's head, and she remembers everything, and so it's just sort of implied that Eren had a conversation with Mikasa as well, and they're crying over Eren's death. Then Armin and Mikasa realize that the power of the Titans are gone, and we see that Jean, Connie, and Gabby are all turned back into humans, and so are the rest of the guys that turned into Titans. And then we get little tidbits of dialogue, which implies that Eren must have visited everybody and gave them a little conversation, because everyone understands why he did this now. We flash over to Levi, which this is probably one of my favorite moments of this chapter, where he sees all his dead comrades, and they salute him, and he salutes them, pretty much ending his arc. Connie and Jean end up seeing Sasha, and she does the salute too. And Falco ends up embracing Gabby, and it looks like Gabby is like suplexing him, which is weird. But then we flash over to Reiner, and Reiner's talking to his mother, and they sort of reconcile. Mikasa tells Armin that she's gonna take the head to a place that she can give a proper burial, and she leaves. Then there's a sort of a standoff where the last contingent of Marleyan forces are standing off against the subjects of Ymir. They're being held at gunpoint because they suspect they're gonna turn back into Titans. But then Armin goes in front of them and convinces them that since they're being held at gunpoint but they haven't turned into Titans, that they're somehow free of the Titan curse. And then he takes credit for killing Eren, and we see Mikasa walking away from everything. We flash forward 3 years and we see Historia having a child, and it looks like it's a daughter, and she's sort of narrating for us, telling the reader that the remnants of the Jaegerists have become even more militarized, and they're getting ready for the retaliation of the allied nations around them, and they're getting ready for that impending war. Historia then looks out towards the sea. Then we flip over to the ship that's carrying Armin, Reiner, Jean, Connie, and Pete, and we get this weird scene where Reiner's sniffing the note that Historia wrote, and then they're all just kind of commenting and talking about what they're gonna do, and they're concerned that in their weakened state, can they stand up against Eldia? But they're sort of on a peace mission, and they're talking about how they believe that they can get something done, and they're gonna tell their story. And the way they see that they're gonna do this is Armin says, we're gonna tell the story of how we all came together and killed Eren, and that's gonna supposedly, in theory, supposed to stop the impending war that's gonna happen between the allied nations and the nation of Eldia. And then we see that seagull again in the air. Then we flip over to Paradise, and we see that Mikasa's sitting at the tree that her and Eren were in the first episode, and we see Eren's gravestone. She looks pretty depressed while she's talking to Eren, recalling back on previous memories, and she starts breaking down in tears, and she sort of slumps over and the scarf falls. Then a seagull comes out of the sky and wraps the scarf around her neck. She looks up into the sky and she's in tears, and she thanks Eren for wrapping the scarf around, and which is a callback to a previous promise that he made to her so many years ago. And that's the end. That's the end of Attack on Titan. So first of all, I want to talk about the feelings that I had before I talk about maybe some of the issues with the logical consistency and the proper narrative flow with the story, and especially this chapter. Feelings wise, I think the ending was great, especially that final panel. I'm pretty sure the writer Isayama had that panel in mind for quite some time, and it was very poetic, and it elicited, like, it almost brought me to tears. I was on the brink of tears when I saw that final panel. Armin and Eren's conversation was also full of feels. Even though it was a little bit abbreviated, I kind of wish that they might have stretched it out between like 2 chapters, but it was effective as far as bringing their relationship to a close. Also, I wanted to quickly mention how grateful and happy I am that this story actually reached a proper conclusion, and it didn't just go on hiatus on indefinitely. I'm looking at you, Berserk and Hunter. That being said, so after reading that chapter the first time, I was thinking, wow, that was a great ending. But then I started thinking about it some more, and I reread the chapter, and then some of the questions started coming up that I felt were left unanswered, and maybe I didn't see them for whatever reason. So let me know in the comments if you guys know the answers to these questions. But just some of them that popped up were, why was Mikasa chosen as a significant being that made Ymir change her mind? And what happened to that spinal bugworm thing, the hallucinogenia in the end? Did it just go away after Mikasa killed Eren? Did that thing actually have a mind of its own? Or was Ymir in control? Who was actually in control in the end? What was different about the Ackermans? Why weren't they affected by the gas or spinal fluid of Zeke? And what was Annie's hardening powers about? Why did she crystallize and not break until the rumbling? Was that just their choice? And as far as Eren goes, was it the Founder's powers or the Attack Titan powers that gave him the time abilities? In earlier chapters, I thought it was the Attack Titan powers, but in the end, Eren describes it as the Founder's abilities. And does Eren have the ability to control nature as like a spirit like Ymir? Or did he actually reincarnate into a seagull? And what was the point of the Tiber family? Why were they given so much emphasis in the Liberia arc? And I'm sure there's a ton of more plot holes / questions that came up, that those are just the ones that sort of popped up in my head after I read the chapter a couple of times. But those actually lead me to one of the flaws, at least I see it as a flaw in this story's conclusion. And I just want to talk quickly about a concept called Chekhov's gun. I'll briefly describe it, but it's a principle in dramatic storytelling that came about from letters written by the Russian playwright Anton Chekhov. And the principle basically states that everything that doesn't have a relevance to the story should actually never be really shown or emphasized upon. For example, if there's a hanging rifle in the first chapter, in the second or third chapter, it should go off. If it's not going to be fired, it shouldn't be hanging on the wall. Or another way to put it, there shouldn't be a loaded rifle on the stage if it's not going to go off. It's wrong for someone to make promises to the audience that aren't going to be fulfilled. These principles all have to deal with foreshadowing and giving readers promises, which for the most part, I think Attack on Titan dealt with masterfully, especially in the first couple of arcs and chapters. I could just think of the key to the basement, which we got the loaded gun in the beginning of the story, but we didn't get the payoff till much later on. In this last bit of story, however, I feel like a lot of these concepts were sort of lost. There are a few ways that this principle can be violated in a sense, though this isn't really a rule, and obviously this can be subverted, but for the most part, I think it really works when promises are fulfilled in a story and things are given adequate foreshadowing. One of the violations is setting up promises where there's no payoff in the end, and a few examples I thought of were the Tiber family and the Warhammer Titan. Much of the climax of the LBRY arc dealt with both, and its significance was mainly lost after Eren gained the Warhammer Titan powers. I mean, he did do that cool impaler attack in the following battle against Reinar and Galliard, but aside from that, he didn't use it anywhere else, and it was largely forgotten. In fact, I was wondering why he didn't pull that weapon out during the fight with Reinar himself, since he was getting his ass whooped in that fight. Why didn't he pull out like a giant hammer or something just to beat him up? But that might be a topic for when I cover that chapter in a later video. Another sort of false promise that I saw was Historia and her child. I felt like after Historia became the queen and that arc was wrapped up, there was little else she did, though her pregnancy was getting really foreshadowed to be something more significant to the story, but in the end there was just a throwaway panel and nothing else afterwards. I thought that she could have at least named the child Ymir for, you know, the person that saved her life earlier and cared so much about her, and they seemed to be close friends, but Ymir just pretty much disappeared from the story altogether unless you count the part where she got resurrected to fight as a Titan for a short bit. Another way that Chekhov's gun principle can be violated is when there are payoffs that aren't really foreshadowed, and some of the examples of this were Mikasa's significance to Ymir. We don't know until the final chapter that Ymir was a slave to her love for King Fritz. I didn't really see it get foreshadowed at all, so it was pretty jarring when Mikasa's actions caused the rumbling to stop altogether and also eliminate Titans from the world. I felt like that is a pretty big part of the plot, and that should have been somehow foreshadowed beforehand. And correct me if I'm wrong in that, and it was foreshadowed properly. Another thing was Eren using the attack Titan to kill his father's first wife. To be fair, this was a long time ago. I mean, this was the first chapter, so I'm not really sure if maybe it was foreshadowed and I just missed it. But I don't remember Bertolt being there at all or being present, so that reveal didn't really make much sense to me. I didn't even catch it at first the first time I read this chapter. Also, the whole thing with Eren being a seagull or controlling a seagull, nowhere in the story, as far as I know, was there any Titans that affected animals at all or affected like Mother Nature. So I don't see how Eren could have become a seagull or controlled a seagull even as the founding Titan. I don't really see how that was possible. As far as how I would have ended it, I would have liked to see basically most of the final arc changed up dramatically, which I might talk about how I would have liked seeing it go down in a later video. But even if everything would have led to this chapter, I would have still liked to see some changes to the ending. If you humor me for a moment, the way I would have liked seeing it play out would have been Eren still seemingly defeated, but Mikasa appears extremely guilt-ridden that she killed Eren, and she runs away in like a teary mess. I would have also liked to see Levi maybe die from his wounds after the battle. As he's saluting, he sort of dies. As a side note, I felt like it was way too cheap that no one was killed in that climactic final battle from Armin and Mikasa's side. We can still have Mikasa walking away, but we can be led to believe that Mikasa's walking away and she's in such a guilty-ridden mess that she's gonna suicide. We could get a throwaway panel where all her comrades are at her funeral, and then we can even flash forward to where we see Historia with her daughter. We can still get the panels showing that the world hasn't become a utopia, and as there's still humans, of course there's going to be conflict, but at least now the aliens aren't in a state of perpetual fear. Instead of seeing Jean, Reiner, and Armin and all them coming on a ship, they could already be in Eldia, and they're having really heated debates and arguments and peace talks with Historia and the heads of state of Eldia. Exhausted after a long day of talking and negotiating, she goes to her room and finds her daughter Ymir having trouble going to sleep, so she tells her a story. She tells us a story about a boy named Eren who went through a ton of hardships to help the LDN people, how he did so many bad things in order so that others can live good lives. He made the world think he was a terrible villain, and he even made everyone think that he was killed by his friends. But that's not what really happened. In the panels, we could see Eren using his Warhammer Titan powers to hide his body underground while his friends destroy his Titan body. And his story continues to tell Ymir that Eren ran away from the world, guilt-ridden at all the terrible things he did, but not before telling the person that he loves, Mikasa, where he was. Or rather, she knew where he was through the paths. And we then flip to see Eren and Mikasa at the cabin that they were at in chapter 138, which sort of played out in an alternate reality. But in this case, it would have actually been the future. And they're playing with a son who's named Levi. As they head out to the woods, Eren notices it's cold and Mikasa is slightly shivering, so he fixes her scarf. And that would have been the end. I think that would have been a better ending in my opinion. Somewhat cheesy, I admit, but more satisfied, I think. Let me know what you guys think about that. I admit that wouldn't have solved all the problems or plot holes, but I think it would have wrapped things up a little bit better without changing everything in the last arc, which I hope they do in the anime, but I'm not holding out too much hope for that. At the end of it all, I just thought, what was the point of this story? Sure, the Titans are gone now, but is the world really in a better situation? Are a lot of the characters in better off? You can say some of them are, but others like Mikasa is straight up depressed. So I don't really know if Eren actually did the right thing or if things played out according to his plan. And if they did play out according to his plan, then he seemed like a terrible character in my opinion. Endings are really important to me. I think a lot of people downplay the importance of endings. I've seen a lot of comments on Reddit and YouTube saying that, or asking the question rather, that just because the ending of this story might have not been good, does that ruin the entire story? And of course not. It doesn't invalidate the other parts of the story, but it does hurt it quite a bit. I'll give you an example. Imagine that you were at a job and you had an amazing hiring process and the majority of your time there was great, but then at the end you were fired over some bullshit and you were thrown out of the office by security. I think it would be very, very difficult to look back at that job fondly, and I think it's the same way about stories. But again, these were just my initial thoughts. I know a lot of this might have been like rambling, but let me know what you guys think. I might revisit this once I read the chapters again. I might actually go through and make some videos about the final arcs and discuss what happened after the anime. Anyways, I appreciate you guys for being here this long. Please like, dislike, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. Peace.